I remember one New Year's Eve when I was back in Iowa. Actually, I was kind of home on winter break from college, and there was this New Year's Eve party, and I really wanted to go. I knew that there was going to be a lot of my friends from high school were going to be there, and I just really wanted to see some of those guys and just have a chance to party with them. But the problem is the weather forecast indicated that there was going to be this huge blizzard, and it was going to be like rolling in right about midnight, right at that time where you're going to be really like celebrating that new year. Um, but like I said, I really wanted to go, and so I remember my mom and dad first of all suggesting that I stay home, and I'm just like, no way, I'm not going to miss this party, not for that, just because of weather. Because I mean, seriously, what really is going to happen? They always over exaggerate that stuff anyway, right? So then I remember my mom was I'm getting ready to leave. She was like, I think maybe you should dress a little bit warmer. It's really going to be cold out there tonight. What if something happens to you and you have to be like, you know what? I'm going to a party. You know what I mean? I look pretty fine just the way that I am, and I'm not going to worry about wearing warm clothes. And so my dad said, well, if you don't want to dress warmer, why don't you at least bring a heavy parka along and a pair of insulated boots, just in case you do get stuck and you have to walk someplace. And I'm thinking, that ain't never going to happen. I'm not bringing that parka. I don't even want to carry it out there. It smells like horse manure in the first place, and those boots, I'm not wearing that anyway. My leather jacket is more than warm enough if anything were to happen to me, which I'm pretty sure it's not. Okay, and then I remember once we got into the party, it's like the blizzard hit a little bit earlier than normal, and there were a lot of people that were starting to leave early. And I'm thinking, man, what a bunch of wimps! It's how bad could it possibly be? You can't even hang around till at least midnight, and then when finally it was a little past midnight and it had been blizzard for a while, it was my turn to leave. I remember my buddy suggesting, he's like, you know what, the way that the wind's blowing out there, it's going to really drift across the east and west roads. He goes, if I were you, I'd stay up at the east and west roads, take that north road all the way until you get to the highway, and then you can take that, and they always keep the highway cleared out, and you won't. You're more likely to make it home safe because we don't want anything bad to happen to you. And I'm thinking, you know what, I got four-wheel drive. You know what I mean? I ain't worried about getting stuck. I mean, that's fine for you guys in your cars, but you know what? Nothing's going to happen to me. And then I remember turning down that first east-west road, and it's like, wow, these drifts are pretty big, But I know how to drive through snow. One of the big things in snow is you don't want to slow down. If you slow down, you're like in deep trouble, right? And so I'm starting to hit those drifts, and I'm just like pushing on the gas. I'm like, the faster I go, the less likely I am to get stuck. And then all of a sudden I run into this drift, and it was like, it went on forever, and all the snow's blowing up over the windshield, and all of a sudden, I'm in an 8-foot ditch, stuck. And the first thing that came to mind is, okay, I know that they always say in situations like this, you should never leave your car. Just stay in your car and wait for help to arrive. That's where you have shelter. But I'm thinking, you know what? It's not that far. I mean, I'm looking up ahead, and I see the lights are on. I'm kind of in the middle of this road where there's, it's not a country road. There's not too many houses, but it's probably maybe a half a mile. I can see the lights up there at a farmhouse. And it's like, I can make that. I'm a young man. I'm in good shape. I'm used to be out in the cold. I mean, it's only half a mile. I can certainly make that. And so I remember getting out of the truck. I remember heading out. It's like, and all of a sudden, I'm starting to look back, and it's like, wow, I'm a long ways from the truck, but I'm still a long ways from that house too. And I can't feel my feet, and I can't feel my hands. In fact, I'm getting to the point where I can't feel anything. And I remember thinking for just a little while, it's like, you know what, maybe I should just rest. Maybe I should just lay down in the snow and go to sleep. Fortunately, I didn't. I did make it to that house, and there's another story that gets there when you start knocking on somebody's door about 2 o'clock in the morning. They're not always anxious to let you in, but that's a whole other story. The thing was, though, here's a situation where I had ignored every red flag along the way. I had not heeded a single bit of good advice that I'd been given by a lot of people, right? Because when push came to shove, it's like I never believed it could happen to me. Never along the way did I ever think the things that they were saying could happen would ever happen to me. But now I'm thinking to myself, it's like, wow, how did I get myself into a mess like this? Because you know what? I know better than that. Have you ever found yourself in that situation before? Have you ever found yourself in a bad place and just wonder, like, how in the world did I get myself here? Or maybe you know exactly how you got there, and you're thinking, what in the world was I thinking? How could I possibly have made a choice like that? Well, guys, with that in mind, have you ever read what God had to say about David? Let's read it in Acts 13, verse 22.
After removing Saul, he made David their king. God testified concerning him, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart.
Wow. God says, I have found David to be a man after my own heart. I mean, isn't that how we all want to be described by God one day? A man or a woman after God's own heart? I mean, wouldn't that be just like amazing? Are you also familiar with, though, the story of David and Bathsheba? Let me refresh your memory here. This in 2 Samuel chapter 11. So read for me 2 Samuel 11, verses 3 and 4.
And David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her.
And so here we read that this man after God's own heart knowingly and willfully sleeps with another man's wife. It seems like after slaying the giant, the two things that David is most famous for is being a man after God's own heart and committing adultery, right? It's like, how do those things fit together? I mean, how does someone like David find himself in a situation like that, in that kind of sin? It seems like it's almost impossible to reconcile those two things. But guys, I think God has given us this example so that we're able to recognize that even godly people fall into temptation, right? Even godly people can fall into sin. And I think he gives us an example, not so much as a condemnation of David, although he's definitely condemned by this, but to get us thinking, put us in the right frame of mind when we start thinking, it could never happen to us. In fact, we read it in the Proverbs. Read for me from Proverbs 16, verse 18.
Pride comes before disaster, and arrogance before a fall.
So lest we become too self-confident or we judge David too harshly, let's take a little closer look at the events that lead up to this most famous sin. So let's go back to 2 Samuel chapter 11. Now read for me verse 1.
In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem.
Okay, so sin often begins with just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it often begins with a choice, okay? When we refuse to do what we know we should be doing. Okay, so we're on a slippery slope when we're not where we're supposed to be. Let me say it one more time. Okay, so we're on a slippery slope when we're not where we're supposed to be. And we're on a slippery slope when we're not doing what we should be. We're on a slippery slope when we're not doing what we should be. At a time where kings went out to battle, David stays home. He doesn't feel like going, and so he doesn't. He sends somebody else. David has just put himself on a very slippery slope, a place where when temptation comes, men fall. But how does a man after God's own heart get to a place like this, where he's unwilling to do the things that he knows he's supposed to do, and he stays behind? Well, just so you know, the answer to this question actually starts much, much earlier than we find here in 2 Samuel chapter 11. Difficult circumstances and some poor choices on David's part, right, has set him up for this fall. In fact, that's the way sin and temptation usually work. Okay, it rarely is as simple as waking up one day and says, you know what, I'm gonna sin today. It doesn't work like that. Generally, temptation sort of sneaks up on you, and then sin hits you like suddenly, almost like out of nowhere. Okay, but there are some precautions that you can take. I mean, a wise man can see it coming if he pays attention, right? And so God gives us this story of David, okay? Not so that we can excuse our sins, not so we can say, well, God, I mean, David did it, and he was a man after God's own heart. So, I mean, who am I? Of course I'm going to fall. Of course I'm going to sin. It's not about that. It's not about justifying what we've done, okay? It's so that we can recognize the times when we're vulnerable, right? And put the proper safeguards in place so that it doesn't happen. Okay, because David's actually, he's in the middle of like the perfect storm here. When temptation comes, he's been experiencing some major losses in his life, some huge disappointments, and even some big time failures. And so he's kind of set up, right? He finds himself in this really bad place mentally and emotionally before it ever happens to him physically. I want you to read next for me from 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 25 and 26.
Oh, how the mighty heroes have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies dead on the hills. How I weep for you, my brother Jonathan.
So, guys, just so you know, David has just lost his best friend. And more than the loss of a close friend, okay, this was the one guy that David had in his life that he could be open with. Remember, he's king, okay? He has a certain standard that he has to uphold. He can't just let anybody in and see him for who he is. But Jonathan was that one guy. It was the one guy he could be open with. It was the one guy that he was willing to listen to. It was the one guy that not only could encourage him, right, when he was a bit down, but also was the guy who would call him out when he was not where he was supposed to be. He was the one guy who David would listen to for the things that he needed to hear and not just the things that he wanted to hear. They'd walked together, they'd done life together, but now he's gone, and David is alone. And guys, we're on a very slippery slope when we're walking alone. We're on a slippery slope when we're walking alone. I mean, everyone needs another person in their life that they can be themselves with, right? Everyone needs someone in their life that they can be real with, that they can be open and honest with, right? Without any risk of being judged. Everyone needs that someone that they can trust for their advice when it comes to the really, really hard issues and the really, really hard decisions, right? And everyone needs that person in their life that'll call them out, right? Someone that'll challenge them when they've fallen for the lies or just their own misguided thinking, okay? And that was what David had in Jonathan. But now Jonathan's gone. Next, I want you to read for me from 2 Samuel, chapter 11, verse 1. Let's reread that.
In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem.
So that's that verse that we talked about a little while ago, right? It's the time of the year when kings go out to battle, but David stays home. And after we talked about the Jonathan thing, do you think that if Jonathan was still around, he would have allowed David to stay behind at the time when the kings are supposed to be out there with their troops? Not likely, right? But there's more to the story, guys, than just David losing his close friend and his accountability partner, right? As I mentioned earlier, David's like in the middle of the perfect storm, okay? So with Jonathan gone, right, and David's grieving the loss of his good friend, so he tries to find other things to distract him from that loss. He wants to busy himself doing some projects, and so he thinks, I'm going to do something for God, right? Maybe God will give me some peace about this. See, he's always dreamed bring the Ark of the Lord, the Ark of the Covenant, okay, into the city of Jerusalem. He wants to build God this house, a temple fit for God, because for the last 370 years, right, the Ark of the Covenant has sat in the original tent that the Hebrews built all that time ago at a place called Shiloh. And David said, now is the time to bring the Ark of God into my city, the city of Jerusalem. Okay. Now, when God had the Ark constructed, he had it constructed in such a way that it could be carried, it could be moved. Right at that time, they were out in the wilderness, and they moved from place to place. And so, well, let's read about the construction. It's in Exodus chapter 25, verses 13 to 15.
Making poles from acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Insert the poles into the rings at the sides of the ark to carry it. These carrying poles must stay inside the rings. Never remove them.
Okay, so God gives instructions on how the ark is to be built so that it can be carried. And then he also gives instructions on how the ark is to be moved, how it is to be carried. All right. And guys, just whenever the ark was moved, okay, it was to be carried by a special group of priests, men who would be purified ahead of time and were given special instructions on exactly how that task was to be accomplished. Okay. Read for me now from 2 Samuel, chapter 6, verses 1 through 3.
Then David again gathered all the elite troops in Israel, 30,000 in all. He led them to Baalah of Judah to bring back the ark of God, which bears the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, who is enthroned between the cherubim. They placed the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from Abinadab's house, which was on a hill. Uzzah and Ahio, Abinadab's sons, were guiding the cart.
Okay. Now, just so you know, we talked about it a little bit before, the ark was never to be pulled on a cart, right? It was supposed to be carried by special priests. But here's the situation where David decides he's going to do it his own way. He's not going to follow God's instructions. He's not going to do it God's way. He's thinking, you know what? It's 20 miles from Shiloh to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem's at the top of this huge hill. It's going to be like all uphill. You know how long it's going to take those priests to get that uphill? It's like, you know what? It'll be so much easier to just put it on this cart and let the oxen pull it up the hill. It'll be faster. It'll be easier. And so David decides to do it his own way. Rather than follow God's way. And guys, we're on a slippery slope when we're doing things our own way rather than God's way. We're on a very slippery slope when we decide to do things our way rather than God's way. Next, read for me from 2 Samuel chapter 6, this time verses 5 through 8.
David and all the people of Israel were celebrating before the Lord, singing songs and playing all kinds of musical instruments. But when they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand and steadied the ark of God. Then the Lord's anger was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him dead because of this. So Uzzah died right there beside the ark of God. David was angry because the Lord's anger had burst out against Uzzah.
Now, I should probably go back just a little bit because one of the things that God said is, and the reason they had the poles there and the poles needed to be right there, and we had the special priests, is because if anybody ever touches the ark, I'm going to strike them dead. So that was a promise. They knew how that was going to be. And whether it was by accident or whether it was by design, Uzzah touches the ark and God strikes him dead, just as he promised he would. Okay? Now, just so you know, first of all, it's so important that we recognize that it's not enough just to be doing something for God. We have to do things God's way. God blesses obedience and not necessarily service. Okay, so let's go a little bit farther. 1 Samuel 15, verse 22.
But Samuel replied, "What is more pleasing to the Lord, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, or your obedience to his voice. Listen, obedience is better than sacrifice.
Obedience is better than sacrifice. Obedience is better than service. God blesses obedience. Okay? But here's something really interesting that I find in this whole story. So remember, David's doing it his own way. He's not following God's instructions. God does exactly what he promised to do. Somebody touched the ark, which they never should do, and God struck him dead. Okay? And now we find something really interesting. I mean, David starts to do things his own way. It goes terribly wrong. And now David ends up actually angry with God. Let's go ahead and read about that. It's in I'm sorry. Let's keep going. We already talked about that. And the Lord's anger was, and David was angry. Let's go back just a little bit to the verse that we just read. In verse 8 it says, David was angry because God's anger had burst out against Uzzah. Okay. David has experienced the consequences of his own sin, and yet now somehow it's God's fault. Have you ever been there? Have you ever done that? Because we have this tendency, right, to blame God for things. It's like, here I am in this situation that I've created completely for myself, and I want to blame God about it. It's not that uncommon. It goes all the way back to Adam, actually. Do you guys remember Adam's response when God calls him out and declares the consequences for his sin? It's all the way back in Genesis chapter 3. Let's read Genesis chapter 3, verse 12.
The man replied, It was the woman you gave me who gave me the fruit, and I ate it.
And so Adam knew what God required of him, right? He disobeys God's instructions, right? Now, instead of taking responsibility for what he had done and accepting the consequences, right? Instead, Adam actually tries to blame God. He says, you know what? It's that woman. It's the one you gave me. If you hadn't given me that woman, I probably never would have sinned. Lord, it's your fault. Why would you give me that woman? You guys, let me just tell you, we're on a very slippery slope when we start to blame God for our own failures. We're on a very slippery slope when we start to blame God for our own failures. Now, one of the biggest dangers with going down that path where we start to blame God for what's going on because of the things that we have done is that it drives this wedge between us and God. At the very time where we should be drawing nearer to God, we're actually moving farther from him. Okay, back to 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 9 and 10.
David was now afraid of the Lord, and he asked, How can I ever bring the ark of the Lord back into my care? So David decided not to move the ark of the Lord into the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom of Gath.
So we're told that now David is afraid of God, right? Instead of recognizing that he's suffering the consequences of his own disobedience, okay? Now instead he looks at God and says, wow, this guy is a vengeful tyrant. There's no way to please him. Here I am doing everything that I can. And God's not only displeased, it's almost like he's working against me. You know what? He says, forget it. I'm not going to help God at all. I'm just going to quit. I'm not going to do anything. There's no pleasing him in the first place. And so actually then David decides he's going to dump the ark at the first place that he can find, right? And he brings it, he leaves it at the house of Obed-Edom. Okay. Back to 2 Samuel chapter 6, this time verse 11.
The ark of the Lord remained there in Obed-Edom's house for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his entire household.
So Obed-Edom, here's a guy who just happens to be at the right place at the right time, right? David's afraid to take the ark any further for what might happen to him, and he said, so we're just going to leave it with you, right? And God begins to bless Obed-Edom for no particular reason, right? It's just like, you know what? When you're in the presence of the Lord, blessings just have a tendency to come. And so the Ark of the Covenant is with Obed-Edom for 3 months, and for 3 months, him and his entire household are just immensely blessed. Let's pick it up next in verse 12. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 12.
The king David was told, "The Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's household and everything has because of the ark of God." So David went there and brought the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with a great celebration.
So one of David's guys reports back that David's like, you know what? You know what happened with Obed-Edom? Since we left the ark of God with him, everything that he touches is blessed. Well, Dave's like, I could use that kind of blessing. And so he decides, let's go get the ark. Let's take it back. You know, Obed-Edom doesn't get all those blessings. I want the ark of God. I want to have those kinds of blessings, right? Let's pick it up next in verse 13, 2 Samuel 6:13.
After the men who were carrying the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, David sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf.
Okay, so David goes back, and this time he does it right. He's having the priests carry it. In fact, actually, David like overkills it. Right, he's not taking any chances, and he knows that God likes sacrifice, and so he brings all his animals with him. And every 6 steps the priests take, he slaughters another animal. He sacrifices another animal. 6 steps, boom, sacrifices a bull. 6 steps, boom, sacrifices the fatted calf. I can't even imagine how much blood was spilled along that trail. But truth is, David finally gets the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, right? And David is so excited, he begins to dance for joy. Let's go back and pick it up now in verse 14. 2 Samuel 6, verse 14.
And David danced before the Lord with all his might, but he wore only a linen cloth.
Okay, so apparently David's royal robes aren't very conducive for dancing, right? And so he literally strips down to just his underwear, and he's dancing in the streets. He's dancing for all he's worth because he is just so excited. He's so happy, right? I mean, you have to be. Have you ever been caught up in somebody's excitement? It's become so exciting, and you're like, wow, he is so excited. I can see how he's a little bit foolish. You see a lot of that stuff on, like major football games and basketball games, and people are just going nuts and they're doing all this wild and crazy stuff, and you're like, oh, I can understand that. So that was a big thing. Well, this is a huge thing for David, and so it's like, how could you hold it against him that he did something a little bit foolish? Well, unfortunately, not everyone takes that point of view. Not everyone understands it exactly like that. Let's go back to 2 Samuel 6, this time verse 16.
But as the ark of the Lord entered the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked down from her window. When she saw David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she was filled with contempt for him.
Okay, so guys, let's get this straight. Michal is not just the daughter of Saul. She's also David's wife. And she sees her husband dancing in the street in just his underwear, and she is very upset. She's mad. The verse says she has contempt for him, right? Let's go back again, 2 Samuel 6, this time verse 20.
When David returned home to bless, David retorted to Michal, "I was dancing before the Lord, and I'm willing to look even more foolish than this, even to be humiliated in my own eyes. But those servant girls you mentioned will indeed think I am distinguished."
Basically, when David gets home, Michal, his wife, confronts him. She's like, how could you do such a foolish thing? How could you make such a fool of yourself like that? Well, at this point, guys, just so you know, a wise husband would be like, oh, I'm sorry. Honey, you're right. I just got caught up in the moment. I got caught up in the excitement. It'll never happen again. Could you please forgive me? But that's not what David says. Let's pick it up back in 2 Samuel chapter 6, this time verses 21 and 22.
David retorted to Michal, "I was dancing before the Lord, and I'm willing to look even more foolish than this, even to be humiliated in my own eyes. But those servant girls you mentioned will indeed think I am distinguished.
So, people, I can't tell you how often, right? When I've been called out by Nicole, when I've been called out by my wife, that I found it somehow in my best interest to defend myself by saying, "Oh, you thought that was foolish? I can make that a lot more foolish than that." The conversation goes something like this. It's like she'll say, "I can't believe you. I can't believe you did something that stupid." And I'd be like, "Oh, you think that was stupid? You haven't seen anything yet. I can be a whole lot more stupid than that. And if you're not careful, I'll prove it to you." And then sometimes I actually do. Ladies, is that something you can relate to? Or is that just like a guy thing where we feel the need to defend our foolishness by threatening to do something even more foolish than that? Anyway, and then here's where he makes this huge mistake, right? On top of all of that, he actually brings up the servant girls, right? Those are the ones that somehow have Michal's insecurities flared up a little bit, right? She points it out. "Oh, didn't you look distinguishing for those servant girls?" Right? And David says, "Just so you know, I think those servant girls liked what they saw. I think those servant girls were thinking, man, that king is mighty fine." Guys, how do you think that was received? Well, let's read about it. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 23.
So Michal, the daughter of Saul, remained childless throughout her entire life.
Okay, that remaining childless. What the text is really saying here is they were never able to get past that. And anybody that knows is when you get in that kind of an argument, the chances that later on that night there's going to be some intimacy between you and the wife, just so you know, not likely. And that's the kind of exchange that doesn't go away either. It's one of those things where you need to kind of actually be a little bit intentional about seeking reconciliation and seeking forgiveness. But at this point, like David's out of control, right? He's not humbling himself before anyone, especially no wife who's overly critical and overly controlling. And so he says to himself, "You know what? I don't want anything to do with her." So let me just ask you guys, have you ever done something really stupid and then like your wife calls you out on it and then you give her the cold shoulder, right? It's like, what's the point of that? It's like, you know what? I'll show her. I'll shoot myself right in the foot. That'll show her. Guys, and just so you know, we're on a really slippery slope when we refuse to reconcile relationships, especially with those that are very close to us. It really puts us in a bad spot. We're on a slippery slope when we refuse to reconcile relationships. And so let's kind of get a recap here of what's been going on, where David's at. So David's lost his best friend, right? He has no one to hold him accountable. He's been trying to do these things for God, and those haven't been going very well. And now, on top of it, he's beefing with the wife at home. And things are starting to pile up, right? But it ain't over yet. Let's go back to 2 Samuel, this time chapter 7, verses 4 and 5.
But the same night the Lord said to Nathan, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord has declared. Are you the one to build a house for me to live in?"
So the final straw comes when Nathan the prophet, sent by God, tells David, "Just so you know, God's not very pleased with you. He's not happy at all. And more than that, God actually, I think, is a little bit pissy with you. I have a message from God. He says, if you think that you're going to be the one to build my temple, think again. I'm not going to give you anything else. I'm not going to honor you in that way. I'm not going to give you anything else to fuel that inflated ego of yours, not after the way that you've been behaving." Next, let's read from 2 Samuel 7, this time verses 12 and 13.
"For when you die and are buried with your ancestors, I will raise up one of your descendants, your own offspring, and I will make his kingdom strong. He is the one who will build a house, a temple, for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever.
And so then Nathan goes on to tell David, you know what? You won't be the one to build the temple. That honor is going to go to your son. It's actually going to go to Solomon, right? And so now David's really feeling sorry for himself. He's lost his best friend. His wife's not appreciating him. She's not loving him the way that she should be, right? He's been busting his butt to do something really important for God. And not only does God not honor him, he's going to take that honor, he's going to give it to somebody else. Now, at this point, David's really starting to feel sorry for himself. And with no one around to call him out, no one around to snap him out of it, David decides he's going to stay at home and just sulk. And so, guys, let me just tell you, we're on a really slippery slope when we start to sink into that self-pity. We're on a slippery slope when we sink into self-pity. And so let's go back to that 2 Samuel 11:1 verse one more time.
In the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. However, David stayed behind.
Because we know David's in a really bad place, a really dangerous place. And we've seen how he got there, right? We've seen the events that led up to the place where he's at right now. Because those kind of things can sneak up on us too if we're not careful. And so I want you to think for just a second, okay? Because we know what's going to happen to David, right? He's about to commit a sin that people are going to be talking about for thousands of years, right? So the question is, what could he have done to avoid that situation, right? What could David have done along the way to keep him from getting to this point? Well, the truth is, David failed to maintain what I call guardrails and guideposts. See, everyone needs guardrails to keep them safe. Everyone needs guideposts to keep them from getting lost, right? And I'm going to suggest that the worst mistake that David ever made was not allowing another man to take Jonathan's place. See, because David would never have another friend like Jonathan. In fact, David would never have another man close to him at all. Okay? He would never be vulnerable. He would never be transparent. And consciously or unconsciously, David decides he's never going to go through the pain of a loss like that again. And so David decides from that point on, he's going to go it alone. And the minute he made that decision, decided he was going to go it alone, from that point on, David's fall was inevitable. It was never a question of if he was going to fall. The only question is when. Later, David's son Solomon would actually write this. It's in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. Go ahead and read that one.
Two people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken.
See, guys, because without other people in our lives, we're really in serious trouble. Okay? Alone, as Solomon says, it's too easy to be attacked and to be defeated. It's too easy to give in to temptation. And so for our own protection, okay, we need people in our lives to serve as guardrails, right? For our own protection, we should never stand alone. Solomon also writes this in the Proverbs. He writes, well, it's in chapter 11, verse 14. Read that one for me. Proverbs 11:14.
Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety.
And so not only is Solomon saying, this could be because of what he's seen in his own father. He said, not only do you need somebody to watch your back, you also need someone to give you wise counsel. He says, without counsel, people fall, right? We need people to serve as guideposts, right? People who can check our direction, right? Who will help us to stay on course for our own safety. We need counsel, right? And Solomon points out, says, without it, people fall. So let me ask you, as we come to the end of this, right? Do you have those guardrails and guideposts in your life? Do you have people, right, to keep you safe and on track, right? Do you have protection and direction? I want you to think about that for just a minute, right? Because without them, we walk a very, very slippery slope, right? Without those people, right? Without the protection and without the direction, we're on this dangerous slope. We're setting ourselves up literally for a fall. You say, wow, I don't have somebody like that. I don't have a Jonathan in my life. Where can I find somebody like that, right? Well, guys, the truth is, not that hard. Lots of people like that at Heartland. The only thing is you need to be a little bit intentional about seeking them out. So I'll just tell you, for sure, you can find them, if you're a woman, you can find them Friday morning at the Bible study there. And on Wednesday nights, we got a women's study and we got a men's study. And I'll just tell you, those are people that can serve as protection and direction. Sunday nights, we got a prayer group. You can find them there. The good news is, if you're looking for people like that, you certainly can find them. But I tell you what, you can't find them sitting on your couch watching TV. If you're going to find people like that, you got to do what they do. You got to be where they're at. The cool thing is, if you decide to do that, who knows? God may even use you to be one of them, to be somebody else's guardrail or guidepost. Amen? Amen. So guys, this is the time where we move into our time of communion. And as we always talk about, in Scripture we read that you should never do this lightly. Before you ever take communion, you should examine yourself. You should do a little bit of a gut check. You should do a before and after, right? Where you think about what your life was like before Jesus and what your life is like now. And that's when we give an opportunity to give him thanks. If sometimes where sin is revealed, that's where we confess it, right? We don't make excuses. We don't blame God for the things that are going on in our lives, especially if they're the things that we have created ourselves by the way that we walked. And if you've done any of that, this would be a time to make yourself right with God, where you just say, you know what, I'm sorry about that, Lord. It's not your fault, it's my fault. Would you help me? Would you help me climb out of this pit that I've fallen for myself? Would you help bring men and women of protection into my life? So this is that time where you kind of examine where you're at, you examine where you want to be. You thank Jesus for how far he's brought you so far. And so let's go ahead and do that. And then when I come back, we'll take communion together. Okay? So let's take that moment of reflection. In the scriptures we read that on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took bread, and after he had given God thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body broken for you. Each time you eat it, remember me. And so we do. And in the same way, after supper, he took the cup. And again, after he'd given God thanks, he said, this is the new covenant, which is in my blood. each time you drink it, remember me. And so we do. And then in remembering him, then we also give him thanks. This is the time where we thank Jesus. We thank Jesus for the cross. We thank Jesus for what he's done that has allowed us to come into this present situation, right? Son and daughter of God. So let me go ahead and do that for all of us. If you guys would bow your heads with me, let me just give Jesus thanks for all of us. Lord Jesus, we thank you. We thank you that you were willing to put on flesh. You're willing to dwell among us. That through your life here on earth, we were able to actually see God revealed to us. We know the kind of Father that we have in heaven because of you. Because of the love and sacrifice that you made for us, we know about the God that we have, a loving God who's willing to give up so much so that he could have us and his family. And Jesus, we're so sorry for the times where we've kind of decided to go our own way. Instead of following you, we should know better. We should know that your way is always the best way, that you have our best interests always at heart. We ask your forgiveness sometimes where we blame you for the problems that we brought on to ourselves. And we ask your forgiveness for that. And Lord Jesus, most of all, we thank you that you've brought us into a family. Lord, you've surrounded us by brothers and sisters that will help us. And we'll just put our pride down. That will serve as our guardrails, our protection. And they will also serve as our guideposts. Those that give us direction, those that keep us from getting lost or straying very far. Lord, wow, all that you did for us, I mean, it's something that we never could have done on our own. We could have never found that. It's something that only you could do for us. And so, Lord, we are eternally grateful for you. The good thing is we'll be in eternity forever thanking you. I want to thank you right now for all of us. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. And so, guys, once again, we're very glad that you were with us this week. We look forward to seeing you again next Sunday, 10:45, same time. Until then, as always, stay safe, stay well, stay connected. Find those guardrails and those guideposts if you haven't found them yet. And may God bless.